Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I am just so excited to moderate this discussion today in continued celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. And the topic for today is really about the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic diaspora, how one size does not fit all. And I am so excited to be joined today by three amazing professionals with incredible insights to share, people that I really consider my friends. And so we have Javier Rivero, who is the president and COO of Insigneo. Javier, wave.
Thank you, have
we have Rob Barea, who is the vice president of inclusion and diversity at Prudential.
Hello.
And we have Vargas, who is the Vice President of Strategic Engagement and Initiatives at HACR, which is the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. And she's also the founder of the Latinista. And hello. And so everyone should have access to their extremely, extremely impressive bios. So I'm not going to go through their very impressive experiences and so forth, which could take certainly the entire hour. But instead, let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. So when we talk about the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic diaspora, oftentimes there are questions, sometimes confusion about terminology. What is the right term to use, or what are the right terms to use? So taking a step back, when we refer to Latinx, Latina, and Hispanic, we're not referring to a race; it's an ethnicity, right? And so, but there's a bit of confusion about terminology related to this diaspora. And I was wondering if each of the panelists could kind of share their reflections in terms of terminology, what's appropriate, how do you self-identify? And then why don't we tackle that first? And then I'd love to hear from each of the panelists, based on their backgrounds, how they self-identify, a bit about their experiences in terms of challenges as well as successes that they consider to be related to their background. So why don't we start with Jai? In terms of terminology,
Betty?
yes.
Sorry, is the chat locked? Can you open it? Because some people are saying they are not able to put comments into the chat.
Oh,
sorry.
I do not believe it's locked. I see Jai was able to
I can see it.
And then also, if by chance chat is locked for any reason, which it shouldn't be, feel free to put your comments in Q&A as well. And so we'll monitor both. And by the way, yes, please do put in your questions. This is meant to be a dynamic discussion. And so Marlon and Emma, who are my co-founders and colleagues at TAIQ, they'll be monitoring, and then we'll be sure to engage the crowd and answer your questions. So, Jai, turning back to you, I'd love to hear your perspectives in terms of terminology and how you self-identify.
Thank you, Betty. I think, like most people, it's been a journey of evolution within ourselves. Me personally, I am an immigrant from Dominican Republic. I was born in DR and immigrated to New York City by way of Washington Heights, like many of us do. When I was really, really young, I was just 3 years old. I grew up between New York and New Jersey. And as I started to create my community around me, I started realizing that I was using those terms Hispanic, Latino, Latina, really interchangeably, because we, or I specifically, didn't really understand how the difference between ethnicity, what we're talking about here, and race really were. You see, when we talk about ethnicity, it's Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Latine. It's the connection that we have to the Spanish language or to Spain, the country in general. To me, I didn't really understand that you had to also choose a race, Black, white, Pacific Islander, Native American, right? And Asian. Because we don't see ourselves reflected in Black or white, because my friends were Irish or Polish growing up and I didn't see myself as white, and I wouldn't identify as Black because I didn't see myself as African American, or like my Nigerian or friends from Ghana, I didn't identify as Black. I certainly knew I wasn't Asian. And so a lot of us, and me specifically, always chose the sixth option under race, which is other. Now, as I've learned the differences between ethnicity and race, I realize that I'm Hispanic, Latina, Latinx, and also have to choose a race. And when we talk about race, it's bone structure, it's skin color, it's hair texture. Therefore, I'm white. A lot of people don't see themselves reflected, and so many of us choose other. I use the term and identity as Latinx because I work within the HIV and AIDS community quite frequently. I've been on the board for the Latino Commission on AIDS, and within that community, I interact with people who are non-binary as well as transgender. And so when I use the identifier Latina and Latinx within those communities, they automatically understand that I am most inclusive of their stories and backgrounds. And so for me, it's important. It's a sense of making others feel like they belong, however it is that they choose to identify. I think for a lot of us, the story is the same. We've evolved and used a lot of the terminology interchangeably. But really, when you ask me, if you meet me on the street, I will almost always say, I'm just Dominican, right? I'm 100% Dominican, 100% American. And if we want to get into the specifics, that's when it gets complicated. But I always say Dominican.
Great, great. Javier, I'd love to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I put it in a way where it pretty much describes exactly what's out there. I think it's very complicated because there's so many terminologies, right? And I'm not going to go through everything she said, but I think it's spot on. So, you know, it's very hard to sort of pin it down to one word because there's so many different variations of everything she spoke about. And I think by nature, the Spanish language assigns masculine or feminine connotation to words. So that I think complicates it even more. You have el or la. So everything has sort of a male and a female connotation to it. So I think more importantly to really keep in mind all the different variations of it is important. Me myself, I'm Cuban. I was born in Cuba, so you know I grew up in New Jersey as well. Came to the country when I was 9, and like Yai, when I get asked what am I normally don't say Hispanic, Latin. I say I'm Cuban if it's orally. Now it's interesting what she said because it's true now. When you get asked in a questionnaire or any application, you know, there's a ton of variations and different, sort of options that you can pick of or from. And when faced in that situation, I generally say Hispanic because I think it's broader. It has no geographic boundaries. It has no language boundaries to a certain extent, or religion or all the other topics. So I normally pick Hispanic when asked in a questionnaire or anything of that sort.
Thank you. Rob, love to hear your perspectives.
So, given the work that I do, as well as, who I am and the experience I had as a child. So my father was Puerto Rican. That was the most dominant personality in the house. However, my mother is from the Philippines. So when Yai and Javier were talking about when you're filling out the applications, I mean, I had an identity problem most of my youth and most of my teenage years. Not only the fact that, again, I had two separate cultures that, were, even though they had some commonality, because again, they both were conquered by Spain and oppressed by the Spaniards way back when. But there's a lot of similarities between the Philippine culture and the Spanish culture in general. But I also grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Harlem, which again, I did not have any connectivity. So because I had family members only on the Puerto Rican side that were close in the Bronx, uptown, I was able to connect more with the Hispanic side of my culture as opposed to the Philippine. I didn't really understand who I was as a Filipino until I actually had to go there as a child, just to understand that there's other parts to my culture and heritage that I was not fully familiar with. So I've always struggled with, what I am and who I am for most of my, youth, and kind of grew into this as an adult. And still to this day, when I'm looking at filling out those boxes, so to speak, I have to pause and have to think about it because, what is that I'm trying to portray and actually, more importantly, be identified as. And the truth of the matter is, I'm more than just half Puerto Rican, half Philippine. I'm also a retired, connected, disabled veteran. I have kids who are biracial. I have kids that are struggling with their own identity because we have so much included in that diaspora. To your earlier point there, Betty. So that's where again it gets challenging, and I would love to be able to say I'm one thing, right? I think my entire life I would love to be that one thing. The truth of the matter, I was never anything but I would say this all the time. I was either outlaw, outcast, or outlier based upon whatever ecosystem or environment I was in, because I didn't identify directly with anyone in particular culture or nationality. And it gets compounded even worse because I don't speak fluent Spanish, right? So even when I'm with my people, mi gente, right? I still am not really fully into the culture, so to speak, because I can pick up on themes. I know, like, Puerto Ricans have a very colorful in their mannerisms, so I know exactly what they're talking about, but don't say the exact words. So those are the kind of challenges that I possess because I'm multidimensional within my own identity. But at the same time, I respect and I'm very proud of who I am because of the different achievements, the resiliency of both peoples, from a Puerto Rican perspective and a Philippine perspective. And again, having a really strong connection with my father's side, and more importantly, my grandmother, who was a traditional abuela, right? I kind of felt the culture, and all of the great things about the Puerto Rican culture through her, even though Spanish or Tagalog from the Philippine side was not spoken in my house. So those are the challenges I had. So when people ask me I normally lead with Hispanic, but I also add that what else I am, which again is of Asian descent. But we talk about race and ethnicity. Race is a scientific construct. It's not real. And a lot of times we kind of forget that because we want to easily classify who we are as a people so that we can be part of a bigger tribe, so to speak. But the truth of the matter is, and Yai kind of alluded to that, it's more than just your features, right? It's about who you are as a people. And again, race doesn't really always include that as a topic, as a theme, because again, race is a scientific construct to kind of classify, and it has some very harmful impacts and designed as such throughout the course of history. So,
right. So I'm going to come right back to you, Rob. I just wanted to make a couple of comments in terms of, because I did see that there was some notes in the Q&A and the chat about the term of Latinx, / Latina. One thing I wanted to emphasize too is that not everyone who's Latinx and Latina is Hispanic. So, for example, you can have people from Brazil, right, who are Latinx / Latina, however, and actually there's some, question in terms of like, what, should we say Latinx or should we say Latina, because X is actually not, not really, and actually we have more qualified people to say this, to talk about this, but, you can't really pronounce it as Latinx in Spanish. It's, so, and that's why the term Latina has come about, because that is actually something that is properly pronounced in Spanish, right? So I just wanted to, kind of point out, why, Latinx, Latina, also exists, because it's not everyone who is Latinx and Latina is Hispanic. So, but Rob, I wanted to piggyback off of, you talked a bit about challenges that you had as a result of your background. And one of the things that we really want to emphasize here today is just about celebrating our backgrounds too, and the positive things that have really come from being who we are. And you mentioned you are multidimensional, right? But perhaps, share a short anecdote about how your background has really fueled your success.
Yes, so I appreciate the question. Between who I am and again that multidimensional framework that you just mentioned, and also too being in the military for 24 and a half years, being around the globe, um, um, and being surrounded by other cultures, I've leveraged this my lack of having an identity as a youth, as a teenager, to really be exposed to many different cultures that I wouldn't have if I was a singular nationality, in my opinion, right? As well as where I lived, and more importantly, the kind of circles I was in and during either as a youth and more importantly in my early adulthood, being in the military. So even though it's been a challenge, I mean, I've recently embraced the fact that I am an outlaw, I am an outlier, I am an outcast based upon, because even when I went to the Philippines, when I mentioned as a youth, yes, I'm Philippine. I have Philippine blood in me and ancestry in me, but I didn't know a thing about the culture or the language. And then just being in where my family lived, I felt like an outsider there too, but that was family, right? So I had to embrace and endure these feelings of trying to understand, who I am as Rob Barea. And as a result of all those different challenges, I got to understand what my purpose was because I was able to embrace it. So by being able to embrace all of these differences, as well as being on the outlier, outcast, or outlaw that I always say, I understood specifically, again, how people feel when they're in a room and they are the only one in a room. And I think my goal in life and my purpose in life is to make sure that one, that we have that entry vehicle, right? We have a seat at the table, but how to embrace that otherness so that you can find the power in your diversity, the power that makes you different, and more importantly, the difference in perspective at the table that is valued by the individual in the room. So I've learned to, again, over the course of many years, to truly embrace that difference that I have, that odd person out, so to speak, and leverage it into a strength so that when I'm in the particular circles, I understand that the importance of embracing other cultures before your own and understanding their point of view before your own, and then leveraging that to get to that common goal. So those are the things that I've kind of leveraged by being this, again, this different individual. And I think this is why I'm in the DEI space, because now I'm so comfortable just being that only person, having that difference of opinion, being that change agent, being the person that says, okay, we need to do this because you don't realize as a cultural broker that there's a differences of opinion, different perspective that you have to embrace. And I get to do that and get to do that freely on my day-to-day operation. And I don't think I was able to do the job that I'm doing now if I didn't embrace that difference as an earlier child.
Fantastic. So your background has really fueled your purpose and has really helped you be the successful person that you are. That
I hope it keeps on coming too. But yes, I definitely, and I think we all have those opportunities where, through our lived experiences, being able to learn, but also being able to pave a way for someone else. I think, as being members of underrepresented population, there's always this desire to, lift as we climb, bring others along with us, pave the way for someone else. I think as we think about, from an ancestral point of view, we owe something to our ancestors to be better and to take advantage of the advantage of their sacrifices, right? So again, leveraging all of those, internal motivators, those intrinsic motivators to really make an impact in your secular position, I think is very important to embrace.
Right, absolutely. So I just want to turn it quickly over to Javier and Jai in terms of other ways as well. Your background has influenced your success. We do have a lot to cover. So would love, just like any thoughts that you might have before we launch the poll.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, being born and living the first 9 years of your life in a communist country kind of puts things in perspective, especially when you come to the United States. So I think the background of understanding where in the country where I was born, which is Cuba, you don't have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, or any freedoms for that matter. And coming to a country like the United States, then, the sky's the limit. So I think the American dream is very much alive in this country. I always say, when I say it to my kids, I'm a true example of that. Obviously, it takes a lot of hard work and education, but definitely the opportunities are there. And I do agree with what Rob said. A lot of what I've always done in my career has been to make my parents proud and to advance, sort of the culture and everything they did in order to give me the opportunities. The one challenge that I see a lot, and I mentor a lot of people, and I always focus on one key challenge, and it's getting education. I think education is key. I think, going to to school and letting some of our Latinx, Latini, Hispanic communities get an education, be exposed to different things. I think that's very important because that opens the world for more opportunities. So I see that as a challenge. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, very diverse city, but also very challenging because it's not, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of different influences. So getting out of that environment and getting an education is the key in my opinion, and a true challenge.
Right. So I wanted to say something about, how your background has influenced your success. The company that you are currently the president and COO of is a Latin America-based business. And so
Yes.
your background is very important, I think, in terms of helping you to be a successful leader.
Correct. Yeah, and not only that, it also allows you to understand sort of the thinking in Latin America and why clients do certain things. Again, going back to communism, Latin America is now moving a little bit to the left. So you're starting to see different people from different countries leave their countries, leave their families behind. And that ties back to what we do, which is wealth management. So the way they move their money, the way they place their money. So it definitely does help. And the language is very important as well.
Great. Jai?
I wanted to add that it's always about respect. I see what's happening in the chat box. There's always someone that's going to say, I don't agree with the evolution of these new terms. And it's absolutely okay. The fact of the matter is that all of these terms exist. I identify as Latinx. You can use Hispanic or Latino, and it doesn't impact you at all. At the end of the day, it's all about respect. We've never been trying to find just one term that encompasses the diversity of those 62 million people under this umbrella here in the US. It always depends on the individual. So the fact that we're spending so much time and energy talking amongst ourselves and asking which one is the right or the incorrect term, that's not the question at all, right? These terms exist. I use one of them, you can use a different one, and it doesn't impact you at all. And so these articles that I see being shared in the chat box are written by someone who could have done a research study with a few people in their community. It still exists. These terms are always evolving. The idea really is making sure that we respect one another. When someone says, I'm non-binary, that's why I use Latinx or Latine because I'm in Latin America, right? It doesn't impact you at all. And so I think that's the biggest challenge within our community that always needs to be addressed, right? Making sure that you're comfortable with how you identify and you respect how someone else identifies. And that's the reason why we're having this conversation, to talk about all of the diversity and the inclusion that needs to be spoken about and oftentimes reminded to some individuals in the community that don't agree with the evolution. That's quite all right. They still exist and I'll still use them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Actually, that's a perfect segue to our polls that I want to launch, which is about inclusion, right? So I'm going to launch them right now. There are two questions. How do you feel about the progress of inclusion for the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic community in the corporate world? As they're progressing, no real change, regressing? And then also, how do you feel about the progress of inclusion for the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic community in society more broadly, right? Progressing, no real change, regressing. So, just going to leave it up for 30 more seconds. And then I would love reactions from the panelists regarding what people have said. Okay. So I'll have it up for a full minute. So another 13 seconds. Five more seconds. So get your responses in. All right. So I'm going to end the poll now. I'm going to share the results. Can you all see the results? So in terms of the corporate world, 46% feel that there's progress. 50% no real change, 4% regressing. In terms of in society, roughly the same, I guess, but 54% believe progressing, 38% no real change, and 8% regressing. I'd love, to any commentary, Jai?
Absolutely. I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the corporate world when it comes to Hispanic and Latinx representation. When you think of the Fortune 500, there are a possible 5,000 seats that could be held by individuals. Unfortunately, Hispanics and Latinos and the Latinx professionals only hold about 3% of those seats. For Latinas, it's even worse. We hold only 59 out of 5,000 seats. But we are seeing progress. For those of you who are following, we haven't had a Latina CEO in quite some time. We've had two in the past. And about 2 weeks ago, we just heard that Priscilla Almodovar, who's now the CEO of Fannie Mae, is the only Latina CEO in the Fortune 500, which is a huge accomplishment. And for those of you wondering how many Hispanic or Latino CEOs we have in total in the Fortune 500, we now have 21. So that's progress. There are only 6 Black CEOs. And within those Black CEOs, we have 2 women, 40 Asian, 44 women. So we do see progress in some instances, but it's still a big challenge. There are about 350 companies out of the Fortune 500 that have absolutely no Hispanic representation on corporate boards. And so in some instances, we do see a bit of progress, and in some others, we can't break that glass ceiling, and the broken rung that we see in the entry-level positions is still very much broken.
And if I got to add, that's great information, yeah. And if I could add to what you stated, board diversity has been a topic of conversation for many years, and I think post George Floyd's murder, there's been a more of a deliberate approach to that. So as a result, board diversity has increased. To your point, not as fast and as large as we would have probably liked, but there is some progress there as well. And as a result, those having, again, that diverse boards, primarily for this conversation, Hispanic, Latinx professionals on those boards, will be the start of how those conversations are happening at the highest levels, talking about proper representation and leadership and ensuring that that voice of the Hispanic and Latinx community is within those board conversations. And I think from a future state of that, within the next 3 to 5 or maybe even 10 years, we should see, again, some more progress as it pertains to a visibility of leaders within the Hispanic diaspora within corporate America. So, when we talk about DEI, we always talk about that proverbial needle, right? And if you really look at a needle, you really don't know how far it's going, but you take whatever progress you have and call it a win. But it's definitely more of a journey perspective than a specific outcome, because this is, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to solve this overnight either. But I think there is specific progress that will have even better progress in the future when it comes to board diversity and having Latinx and Hispanic leaders on those boards.
So I have an observation, and I actually like a hypothesis, and I wonder what your reaction is to this. So I see actually that 54% of people believe that in general society, there has been progress, whereas in the corporate world, maybe there's perception of less, so 46. So I don't know if this panel feels like that is, there's more progress in society more broadly than in the corporate world. And is that, I wonder, potentially a leading indicator of what may come in the corporate world? So when there's more inclusion in society more broadly, perceptions, biases, whatnot, maybe shaped, will that also, help in the corporate world?
I can tell you from my perspective, Betty, I think it starts with society and then it does trickle into the corporate world. And I think one of the, lately in the last couple of years, I'd say, one word, awareness. There's a lot more awareness as far as, society, but also in corporate America. A lot of the companies are, they're building departments just on diversity and inclusion. and there's more focus in making sure that the programs are set up and that people have the opportunities that are warranted regardless of nationality or where they come from. But I also, the flip side of that is it also comes from the people, right? So the people have to want it. Not only does society and corporate America allow the opportunities, but the people that are coming up the ranks and the people that are, looking for opportunities, they also have to apply themselves, and they also have to have the hunger and the attitude in order to get those positions and those opportunities, whether it be, entry level, management, board, and so forth. And I think that's sort of the balance. But I think it is very positive to see the trends, and it's interesting to see the poll results, because I do agree that a lot of progress is being made, not only in society, but also in corporate America.
Great. So actually, let's turn to the next question, because it's really about solutions at the end of the day. How can we create an even more inclusive society and culture? Let's talk about corporate. So Rob, you have been in corporate, DEI for years. And in fact, I met you when you were in a different role within, DEI. So can you actually talk about, in most of corporate America, the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic population represents that minority that we had talked about. So can you actually share some thoughts that you had regarding solutions? How can that are specific to the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic community, that we should really consider, keep in mind?
Sure. So I want to piggyback on some of the stats that I mentioned earlier. If we think about the lack of Hispanic and Latinx leaders within organizations, when we say this often at DI says, you can't be what you can't see, right? So this has a further challenge for Hispanic professionals because they can't navigate to that highest levels of corporate America, which feeds into another challenge that I see that many Hispanic Latinx professionals also have done, probably not recently, but definitely in the past, as they rose to the top, is they had to assimilate in order to accelerate, right? And again, that also means that we have to either cover, or we're not bringing our authentic selves to work every day. And I think that's another challenge that we in the Hispanic community are always having to deal with, right? What does their true authentic self truly mean? And more importantly, how do you show up at work, right? So, those are the two things that I think, are connected, because if you don't have leadership that you can identify with and you're forced to assimilate, you actually lose a part of who you are. And we know from other underrepresented groups, if you can't bring your authentic self to work, you cannot be a high performer, because you're always hiding something. You're always holding something back. You're always concerned about, will your culture come out, and how you'll be received, and more importantly, be allowed to operate within a particular organization. So those are the things that, are paramount a lot of times within organizations, because again, that representation is not there. And then you feel that you have to assimilate. So, what organizations need to do, and this is not, from us within the community have to solve, this is actually organization and leadership has to solve this, right? Is how do we develop those culturally intelligent leaders who truly understand the value of not just the Hispanic population, but also all of the other underrepresented populations too, if you think about, again, how the different demographics show up in particular organizations. So there's a few things that I think we always have to do. Some may be table stakes, but trust me, if you don't do these initial things, you may not be able to go to whatever next level you need to do as an organization. So in developing culturally intelligent leaders, I definitely recommend that we have mentorship and coaching programs that focus on Hispanic Latinx talent, but be strategic in who the mentor population is, and in making sure that those individuals who are mentored outside the Hispanic Latin community, so that there could be some reverse mentoring opportunities, as well as individuals who can show and expand their cultural understanding of a particular population. Also too, is we want to make sure that, if your organization has ERGs, hopefully have BRGs, right? That business aspect is a true imperative as it pertains to DEI, is how do you leverage these resource groups to consistently celebrate the accomplishments of our Hispanic and Latin community, both within and more importantly, outside the organization. If we don't tell stories of celebration, how do we expect them to be embracing us as a people? Right, so we definitely have to celebrate those accomplishments, but more importantly, create these forums where people can learn more about the Hispanic and more Hispanic community, but more understand the challenges of what they can do as leaders within the organizations to support that. And by doing so, how do we provide those opportunities to showcase this talent? And be those advocates for the Hispanic Latinx community. I think that's very important that we think about, the coach, mentor, advocate piece, right? A coach talks to you, a mentor talks with you, and an advocate talks for you. And I believe, I always, when I talk about advocacy, I always reminded of Carla Harris, who I believe is a mentor in my head. Talk about who's bringing that piece of paper into the organization, into that room for you, right? So how do you build that political capital within the organization so that people want to speak for you and allow you to have that exposure to those different projects that will help you elevate within your career. So yeah, it's definitely not a Hispanic community problem to solve. It's absolutely a organizational challenge to solve, and we have to have that cultural intelligence as well. Because I also think about it from cultural intelligence, like it leads from curiosity to intelligence to humility. And what I mean by cultural humility is, what do we know about that and honor about that particular culture and respect that, right? Because it's one thing to know about it. It's one thing to embrace it, but how do you respect it and leverage that to make a better organization? And I think those are the key elements for what we can do as organization for our Hispanic Latinx community.
Yeah, it is, just to piggyback off of what you said, it's not about, the community itself solving the problems and talking to itself. It's really about broader engagement, right? Yeah. So, Jai, I'd love to hear your perspectives also in terms of what is HACR doing, and also would love to, if you could also share a bit about what you're doing with the Latinista in terms of really, trying to push the ball forward.
Absolutely. I agree with what Rob says. We have so many mentors giving us advice, but we don't have those advocates, also known as sponsors, really calling us every time there's a potential role available, opportunity, and mentioning our names in a room full of those elevated roles that we could see for ourselves. And if you're wondering if you have a sponsor or not, you probably don't, unless you know for sure that that individual is always mentioning you and saying, Betty, I've got a great opportunity for you. You have the skill set. I'm going to submit your resume and your profile. You would be fantastic on speaking on this panel. I'm going to submit your name, right? We need more of those advocates championing our names, not just knowing us, but really helping us achieve those career goals. When we work at HACR, the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, we have a number of programs throughout the entire year focused on career and leadership advancement. I'm actually going to be with Rob and Javier next week in Miami for our Leadership Pipeline program, where a number of Latinx professionals representing corporate America, as well as the community, focus on how to be more confident public speakers, understanding cultural and emotional intelligence, how to lead as an empathetic human being within corporate and community America. And so we make sure that as these trends are evolving, whether it's within technology or in our community, giving back to society, we make sure that we bring in those thought leaders and those subject matter experts to share advice and best practices so that we're not recreating the wheel. We make sure that we find those individuals who've been doing this for quite some time to help us help each other. So it's going to be a great event. If you're interested in attending virtually, hacer.org. It's going to be in Miami, and almost every 3 months, we have a really engaging program for corporate America, as well as community members to join, share best practices, and learn from one another. I did the same in my personal life. I created the Latinista. I made sure that Latinas and women of color were being given the opportunities to learn new skill sets. You never want to be in a position where you're up for an opportunity in a role and they say, oh, you don't know how to use Trello, Slack, Asana, or Miro? Oh, that's unfortunate. We just got someone else that just got out of school that knows those programs or platforms, right? You don't ever want to have your head completely down and focused, that you're not constantly learning new skill sets or programs. And so we do that at HACR. I've done that before at Latinista, and it's always about continuously learning something new, and really always based on technology so that you're not left behind.
If I can add something, Betty, and I agree with Yai, and it's pretty powerful because I'm a big proponent of mentorship. I had a mentor and who was not Latin, by the way, but I did have a mentor, and mentorship is so important. And what she said is exactly right. Someone to guide you, help you, hold your hand. And I just want to say this one line that the mentor told me back in the day, and to this day I still use it. She told me, the elevator went up for you, send it back down and pick someone else up. So as leaders and as people of the community, we need to continue to help, and we need to continue to promote and help people elevate themselves.
Thank you. That's very powerful. So Javier, I actually wanted to actually have you talk a bit more about your experience. So as mentioned before, Insigneo is very much a Latin America based business. And so whereas in most of corporate America, the Latinx, Latina, Hispanic community represents a minority, but in your organization, it represents a majority. But obviously there is huge diversity within the community itself. As we had said before, it's a huge diaspora, and it's not a monolith. It's not a one size fits all. I'm very curious to hear a bit about your experience leading a company of that type of diversity.
Yeah, no, and indeed it is a dominant population, not only because we're based in Miami, but we're also based in Latin America. So we have offices in Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Puerto Rico. So naturally, as you say, the majority of our staff is of Latin descent and other countries. So for us, because we need to have that skill set, because our clients and our employees and our clients are based in the different countries, we have to all speak Spanish. So just as a statistic, in our company, over 99% of the staff, employees, clients are Spanish speaking, some Portuguese speaking as well, because we have business in Brazil. So definitely it is a challenge in the sense of, how do we expand and how do we bring people from other diverse backgrounds and so forth. And one of the things that we're doing is, at least here in Miami and the different countries is, how do we partner with different organizations so that we have a deeper reach into talent pools for both employees and clients as well. We opened an office in New York, and that's a whole different market, because in New York, you're not so Latin America focused. You also have European focus and even some Asian focus. So in New York, actually, as we continue to grow that office and we're looking for more staff, you do see a different diverse talent pool out there to bring into the company. The one thing I do want to say for the benefit of the panel is, and at Insigneo, we don't so much, we focus on everything, but we focus on skill and talent. We want to make sure we bring the right person for the right job. And I do agree with the I, and I go back to my famous E word, education. People have to be educated. They have to be technologically advanced, because there is a diaspora between, a kid that just graduates from college and someone who's been in the workforce for many years. So they need to have those skills, and they need to be up to date with the most recent technologies. So it is challenging, but it's something that we do take great pride in. We definitely want to bring, the right people for the right job. But Miami is challenging. South Florida in general, it's very Latin driven.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So also for Insigneo, culture is paramount, and there's something known as the Insigneo way. Would really love for you to talk a little bit about that, and the role that inclusion, and also how TAIQ has played a role within building that culture and the Insigneo way.
Right. I always say a company with a bad culture is a short-lived memory. I've always said that, because culture drives everything. And also culture is what you tolerate. And at Insigneo, we have zero tolerance for not embracing our culture. And you're right, we do call it the Insigneo way. And basically how we got to that is we did many workshops, which included our employees and included our clients, to really define our creed and what do we believe in. And it led to 3 basic principles on how we work as a company, regardless of what level of the company you're in. And it's, we aim higher, we think ahead, and we keep it simple. And although all 3 sound very simple, they're very powerful. There's a lot more to it behind the scenes, but that's how we operate. And as you mentioned, that's sort of the how and the what, right, on how we operate. But also we wanted to bring in more and raise awareness to your point before around diversity and inclusion. And that's when we partnered with TAIQ and we went through a diversity and inclusion workshop, which spanned over a couple of months. And we had tremendous participation from across the firm. And one thing I noticed with that is, even though, as you mentioned, we are in a diverse workforce, because we really are. I have people here from pretty much every country, every race, and so forth. But it did open some eyebrows, and it opened some eyes as to, you think you're diverse, you think you believe in inclusion, but going through the exercise, it really opened their eyes as to there's certain things that I do that are maybe not so inclusive, or not so accepting. And I think that was a big eye opener for people when they got the little green bars and yellow bars, and they were able to see on screen that, there are some adjustments to be made. And happy to say that it did help us, and it helped us advance. And I know we're going to be doing more things with TAIQ. But it was a really good exercise to complement more on the creed and the culture, bringing in the diversity and inclusion aspect into it as a company.
Great. So the last question that I have for you before we open it up to Q&A is, just would love to hear from all three panelists. Any other suggestions in terms of what we as individuals can do to drive more inclusive culture? We've been talking mostly at an organizational level, right? And obviously organizations are made of individuals, but what can we at our individual levels be more mindful of in order to create a more inclusive culture? If you could each just take, a minute max, that would be great.
I think if we continue to ask more questions and the right questions of one another, we'll start to learn a lot about our very, very diverse community. And when we do learn those diverse perspectives and our history and our culture and our background, not just keep it within ourselves, but continue to share with our friends, our family, and our partners. Because even within our friend circles, they're not even sure how to use pronouns, how to really engage, or how to ask the right questions. So I think for us, it's important to continue to ask those questions, keep an open mind, remember that it's always about respect, and it always depends on the individual how they choose to identify, and it does not impact you at all.
I love that, Jai. And in fact, you touched on 2 of the 8 TAIQ inclusive behaviors of being open and being curious.
Yes, so, I love that.
Thank you.
There you go.
Rob? Oh, Rob, you seem to be on mute.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So you took my open and curious one. So I'll look to another word out there: embrace. Learn how to embrace differences and challenge whether or not you are open and curious enough to embrace. Because if you think about what the word means, embrace, right? It's about bringing something so close that you feel it. You feel that spirit. You feel, again, whatever it is that particular entity is giving you back, right? So learn how you are embracing, and if you're having trouble embracing, learn how put yourselves in positions where you're exposed to difference that much more. You can't think about embracing differences if you're not exposed to difference and you don't put yourself in those positions. So you have to actively seek out difference and then embrace it. And if you do that and it becomes more of a behavior as opposed to a specific activity, you'll be more inclusive as a result.
And so Rob, you recently took the TAIQ assessment, which actually, Emma, if you could share in the Q&A and also the chat, the link to the assessment. By the way, anybody can take this assessment for free. So, please go ahead and take it, and it will provide you some insight with respect to those 8 inclusive behaviors that we talked about and how you think, act, and interact along those 8 behavioral dimensions, as well as also how you see your teams. But anyhow, Rob, I'd love to hear any particular takeaways, insights as a result of taking it that may help in terms of increasing mindfulness.
Yeah, so with the structure that you have, think, act, and interact, right? my scores were fortunately high in the think piece, somewhat high in the act piece, and then it was a little bit of a mixed bag on the interact piece, right? So, in my role, I either think that I'm inclusive, I either think that I'm trying to bring people close together, I either think that I'm making a difference. But the assessment that I took told me I had to focus more on the interact piece, because I do have the right framework, I have a direction to go, but that I piece, I think, is something, again, that is the, how do you get that much more out of the effort, right? So, and it was good to understand that as a full mechanism, as just how I'm thinking and how I'm particularly acting as well. The other observation I had is part of the process and the assessment is not just from a personal view, but also a team view. So, there was a special difference as how I perceive myself as well as the team, but there were some parts where I perceive the team as better than I am in certain things, which is important as a leader, because if you're the smartest person on your team, you're probably on the wrong team, right? So you need to surround yourself by smart individuals, people that not only get it, but also can kind of elevate the overall team brand. So those are the two specific, observations I made as a result of taking the assessment.
Awesome. Javier, any final remarks in terms of what we as individuals can do to create a more inclusive culture?
Yeah, I think awareness is important. Awareness of your surroundings. I think also keeping an open mind. You have to sort of look at a broader spectrum. And the last one is acceptance. You got to accept that not one size fits all. So I think those three are key to continuing to advance. Again, like I said before, I think as a society we've made great strides, and I personally feel we're headed in the right direction.
Great. So Marlon, if you wouldn't mind turning your camera on, and also we received some questions. Let's go ahead and ask them from the audience.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. We have a number of questions here, and I'll start off with this first one to any of the panel members. What can employers do to address the multidimensionality and intersectionality of our many Latinx, Latina identities? So many of us fall through the cracks in the recruitment, hiring, development, retention, and advancement in organizations.
I can start, Marlon, if you like. From my perspective, like I mentioned before, and again, there's a lot of variations out there. So I think it's really focusing on talent more than anything. And one of the things that at least we do from our perspective, and I can only speak for my company, we look to make sure that we match the right candidate to the right roles, and not so much focus on different variations, rather than doing the job and making sure that that person can have a career path to grow within the company, that has the right benefits, that has the right, it ties into that as well. Because there's different types of leaves that can be taken, so you want to make sure you have the right benefits to support the different variations and situations out there. So I think it really has to do with making sure that the company is built not so much from the pre-onboarding, because the pre-onboarding and sort of the application process is skills driven and talent driven. But then it's how do you support that person once they're in the door so that they can be successful, they can have the career growth, and they have the right benefits and inclusion in order to grow within the company.
Thank you. I'm going to ask another question. How do you go about addressing and combating the anti-Blackness present in our community? How do you promote allyship within that group, within the group? Anyone?
Good question. I think I'll start, and I think I'm sure Yai, being from Dominican descent, has a very specific reaction to that. But it's we can't have infighting amongst cultures, right? I think that's key to understand first, right? But at the same time, how do we make sure that we are recognizing the differences within this particular, this whole conversation is about the full diaspora of the Hispanic and Latinx community, right? So really, it's really about understanding what we are, but more importantly, how we are different. Because within, just like any other population, there is no such thing as none of them is a monolith, right? if we think about all the different races and populations that we speak about from a diversity perspective. So we have to first acknowledge that there is not one size fits all, to Javier's point and Ya's earlier point, for this. At the same time, and you mentioned this in the previous question, is the intersectionality piece. How do we raise the awareness of why it's important to talk about intersectionality? Because even though we may have connective points, we also have points where we're different. And we have to create a speak up culture within your organization to able to acknowledge that, but also leverage that as a strength. Because as I mentioned in my particular case, I'm not one thing. I would love to have been one thing, but I think even if we talk about from just a country perspective, outside of if you're both from a parents of a similar descent, there's still other things that make you up who you are. If you think about the iceberg, picture that we always see when we talk about diversity. So as far as the infighting, I think we have to have the conversation, acknowledgement that we are of the same, and that there are some differences that we have to acknowledge. I mean, how do we leverage that for our strengths as opposed to keep thinking of them as something that's detriment?
Oh, Marlene, you're on mute.
So apologize. Thank you. Here's another one. Are you in favor of mandating organizations to have at least one minority talent as a qualified candidate for key executive positions?
I wouldn't say you should mandate anyone, right? Because if you force someone to do something they may not want to do, it'll make for a really, really toxic and awful culture within. I think what we have to do is make sure that those individuals that have the power and the opportunities to give to our very diverse communities are in the right roles and they're the right people to be representing our voice. I don't think it's right to mandate any organization to do anything that they don't want to do, because then it will create a pretty nasty and awful culture. I think it's important for people like us to step up to the plate and say that we want to hold those positions and we want to hold them accountable, but also making sure that we make the decision on where we work and which types of organizations and companies and products we purchase from. The dollar that we spend is super important.
Thank you, Jai. Betty, do I have one more? Can I ask one more question?
Actually, we are at time already. It's 1:01. Emma, I don't know if you can just flash up our contact screen. If not, it would be wonderful if you would all stay in touch. Our website is TAIQworld.com. And then also, please, take that assessment. See what how you are with respect to those inclusive behaviors and how you think, act, and interact along those behavioral dimensions. And really, it's a powerful way for us to all become more mindful of our behaviors, because culture is the sum of the individuals. And it's not just always about top down. It's also about bottom up, in terms of each of us have the power to influence a culture and really the experiences and inclusion of others. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Javier, Jai, Rob, for such a great conversation, amazing insights, and really looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.